What if you were given a choice, to obey or to walk away? What if that choice determined the fate of hundreds of innocent lives? Would you follow orders, or would you stand against the tide, knowing the cost of defiance? Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. History is filled with stories that challenge our thinking. Let's talk about it. This is the tale of Battalion 101, a group of ordinary men thrust into extraordinary darkness, a story of choices, consequences, and the weight of human conscience. Stay with me, because this story might just change the way you see history and yourself. It was 1942. The world was at war. Across Europe, destruction and death swept through cities and villages like an unstoppable tide. Far from the front lines, in the quiet streets of Germany, men who had once been bakers, shopkeepers, schoolteachers, and laborers lived ordinary lives. They had families, they had dreams, and they had never imagined that war would find them. But war does not always come with fire and bombs. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet summons, an order that cannot be refused. These men were drafted into Battalion 101, an unremarkable police unit, given uniforms, rifles, and a simple directive: you will serve the fatherland. They did not train for battle. They did not march into war zones. Instead, they were sent to the occupied territories, to villages where innocent people lived. And there, their orders became something far darker than they had ever imagined. One morning in the summer of 1942, the men of Battalion 101 stood in formation outside the Polish village of Józefów. The sun was rising, casting long shadows over the dewy grass. Their commander, Major Wilhelm Trapp, walked before them. His face was pale, his voice heavy. "Men," he said, "today you have a task. There is a village ahead. It is filled with enemies of the Reich. Your orders are to clear it." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others swallowed hard. Then Major Trapp did something unexpected. His expression darkened, and in a quieter voice he said, "If any of you feel you cannot carry out this order, you may step away." Silence. A moment stretched into eternity. Then, one man stepped forward, then another, and another. A handful of men, out of hundreds, choosing to walk away. But the rest, they stayed. Not because they were evil, not because they hated those in the village, but because they were afraid. Afraid of seeming weak, afraid of what their comrades might think, afraid of defying authority, and so they marched. The village was peaceful that morning. Mothers prepared meals for their children. Fathers tended to the fields. Then the soldiers arrived. The orders were clear: round them up, take them to the woods, make them kneel, aim, fire. Some of the men hesitated. Their hands trembled, their stomachs twisted. The first shots rang out, then another, and another. The screams echoed through the trees. Hours passed. The ground was soaked red. The village was no more. And when it was over, the men of Battalion 101 did not celebrate. They wept. Some vomited. Others stared into the distance, numb and hollow. Major Trapp, their commander, sat alone, his head in his hands. He had given them a choice, and most had chosen to obey. When the war ended, the men of Battalion 101 returned home. They were not decorated heroes. They were not famous generals. They were fathers, husbands, neighbors. But they were not the same men who had left. Some never spoke of what they had done. Others tried to justify it. But there were those who could not silence the voices in their heads. Some drank themselves into oblivion. Others ended their own lives, unable to live with the weight of their actions. But what of the few who had stepped away? They had not been punished. They had not been imprisoned or executed. They had simply walked away. And because of that, they had lived. Not without scars, but without blood on their hands. If this story made you think, let me know in the comments. Would you have stepped away, or would you have followed orders? Like this video, subscribe, and let's have a conversation. Evil does not always announce itself with horns and fire. It often comes as a simple command, disguised as duty. The hardest choices are rarely the loudest ones. They are the quiet moments where one step forward or one step back can change everything. When the world tells you to follow, will you have the courage to stand apart?